In a quiet rural town in the United States, where everyone seemed to know everyone, Robert Miller was the model of an exemplary citizen. A middle-aged man, successful in his career, and married to Sarah for over 15 years, Robert seemed to have the perfect life. The couple, blessed with 2 children, lived in a comfortable house and attended the local church, being admired by their community. Sarah was a woman dedicated to her family and committed to keeping up appearances. For her, marriage was an unshakable fortress, an example to be followed. She firmly believed that she had built a perfect home, where love and stability reigned. However, what Sarah didn't know was that Robert was hiding deep secrets. Behind his ever-present smile, he was fighting an internal battle with his sexuality, something he always repressed to maintain the facade of an impeccable life. The story begins to take an unexpected turn when Robert, on a business trip, meets Michael, a charismatic and attractive man. Initially, what seemed like just a friendship between co-workers quickly evolved into something much more complex and disturbing for Robert. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel something he had always tried to ignore, and it shook all his certainties. Torn between his growing feelings for Michael and his loyalty to his family, Robert finds himself trapped in a double life. He tries to maintain a balance between duty and desire, but the task becomes increasingly difficult. His closeness to Michael begins to distance him from Sarah and the children, generating an invisible but palpable tension within the once harmonious home. Robert spends more time outside the house, is always distracted, and avoids any physical contact with Sarah. Signs that she, attentive and intuitive, is quick to notice. Sarah, initially confused and hurt by the changes in her husband's behavior, becomes suspicious. Robert's coldness and emotional detachment plant seeds of uncertainty in her mind. She wonders what is happening to the man she has known and loved for so many years. Motivated by the desire to protect her family and understand what is happening, Sarah decides to investigate. She begins to watch Robert's every move, questioning his excuses and increasingly irregular schedules. What Sarah didn't imagine was that her search for answers would lead her to discover a devastating truth. As she delved deeper into her investigation, she came across something she had never considered: the possibility that Robert was living a life she could never have imagined. This discovery would not only rock their world, but it would also trigger a series of tragic events that would forever change the lives of everyone around them. From that point on, the fates of Robert, Sarah, and Michael are intertwined in a web of secrets, lies, and decisions that will lead them to an inevitable and devastating outcome. What appeared to be a perfect life on the surface was actually hiding a storm about to explode, with unimaginable consequences for everyone involved. Sarah never imagined that one day she would find herself needing to hire a private detective to follow her own husband, the man with whom she shared 15 years of life. The father of her children now became a stranger before her eyes. Upon discovering that Robert was in a secret relationship with Michael, a man he met on a business trip, Sarah's devastation was profound and immediate. The pain of betrayal cut deep, but the shock of learning that her husband was involved with another man was almost unbearable. The image of perfection she had built over the years was crumbling like a house of cards. Enraged, Sarah decided that she would not allow Robert to get away with it. The need for revenge boiled inside her, and the only thing she could think of was confronting him, forcing him to face the consequences of his actions. When he finally did, the confrontation was explosive. Sarah didn't hold back her words, pouring out all the anger and pain she had been accumulating on Robert. Robert, in turn, tried to justify his feelings, tried to explain the inner turmoil that led him to this relationship, but Sarah was not willing to listen to excuses. She cut him off with every attempt, threatening to expose his secret to the entire city, destroy the reputation he cherished, and make it clear to everyone who he really was. Robert's internal conflict only worsened. He was trapped between 2 worlds. On the one hand, the weight of guilt for having betrayed Sarah, for having destroyed the trust and life they had built together. On the other, the growing need to be true to himself, something he had denied all his life. Michael, realizing the gravity of the situation, suggested that they leave everything behind, that they start over together somewhere else, away from all that pressure and judgment. But Robert, tormented by the thought of losing everything he knew, hesitated. How could he abandon his children, his career, the entire life he had built? Feeling trapped, Robert began making impulsive decisions. He turned away from Michael, spiraling into a cycle of self-destruction. Drinking became his constant companion, a way to silence the chaos that reigned in his mind. Each sip was a desperate attempt to escape reality, to avoid the pain of the choices that awaited him. The fear that his relationship with Michael would destroy not only his family, but also his reputation and career paralyzed him. He saw his life falling apart and couldn't find a way out. Meanwhile, Sarah wasn't willing to wait for Robert to decide his next move. Determined to make him pay, she began spreading rumors about him in the community. Without revealing details, he insinuated that Robert was unfaithful, planting seeds of doubt and distrust among those who considered him an example of morality. The impact was immediate. Robert's standing in the community, once unshakable, began to crumble. People whispered behind his back, questioning his integrity, and the life he worked so hard to maintain began to unravel before his eyes. Sarah had declared war, and Robert was on the brink, not knowing how or if he could escape the consequences of his own choices. Sarah knew she was at the point of no return. Her marriage to Robert, which had once been her safe haven, was now a minefield waiting to explode. In an act of desperation, and with a cold, calculated plan in mind, she invited Robert to a dinner that appeared to be an attempt at reconciliation. The environment was prepared, an elegantly set table, candlelight, and the atmosphere reminiscent of the happy days they shared. However, behind this welcoming backdrop, Sarah was determined to confront Robert one last time. Her heart was pounding, but she remained calm, secretly recording the conversation, planning to use Robert's words against him in the future. During dinner, what started as banal conversations soon turned into a confrontation full of repressed emotions. Sarah could no longer contain her pain. With a trembling voice, she revealed that she knew everything. The affair with Michael, the lies, the betrayal. Every word was a blow, and Robert's mask began to crumble. He was devastated, feeling the weight of his actions fall on him like a ton. Sarah, relentless, threatened to expose his secret to the entire community, promising to destroy his career and the life he knew. Robert, in a mix of desperation and panic, begged her not to do it, but Sarah was not willing to back down. The pain she felt needed an outlet, and revenge seemed to be the only way out. The confrontation reached an unbearable level. The pressure inside Robert that had been building for months finally exploded. In a moment of anger and despair, he lost control. What started as a heated argument quickly escalated into physical violence. In a thoughtless and impulsive act, he attacked Sarah. The intensity of the moment was suffocating, and before he knew it, Sarah was dead. Shock washed over Robert. He looked at Sarah's body, unable to process what had just happened. Immediate regret hit him like a wave, leaving him paralyzed. In a panic, Robert tried to cover up the crime. He frantically cleaned up the scene, erasing any trace of the confrontation, and then crafted a narrative for the police. Sarah had been the victim of a robbery gone wrong. However, the guilt began to eat away at him inside. Each attempt to cover up the truth only added to the burden on his conscience. He realized that his actions were driven by the fear of losing everything and the shame of his choices. There was no taking back what he had done, and the idea that he himself had caused this tragedy left him on the verge of collapse. It didn't take long for the police to begin investigating the case. Inconsistencies in Robert's account raised suspicions, and detectives quickly turned their focus to him. Tensions in the marriage, previously hidden, began to surface. Robert's relationship with Michael, which he tried so hard to hide, was discovered and added a complex layer to the investigation. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and everything pointed to Robert as the prime suspect. He knew the truth was about to be revealed, and there was no longer any way to escape the consequences of his actions. Robert sat in the interrogation room, the air thick with rising tension. The police confronted him with the evidence they had accumulated, each piece fitting into a puzzle that pointed directly at him. The contradictions in his testimony became increasingly evident. Initially, he tried to maintain his innocence, but the detectives were relentless. The pressure on him was immense, and each new question pushed him into a corner with no way out. The feeling of being trapped in his own web of lies was beginning to suffocate him. Meanwhile, Michael, realizing the gravity of the situation, began to feel the weight of his involvement. He had imagined that everything would end differently, but now it was clear that there was no easy escape. The city, which once seemed like a safe haven, now became an unbearable place for him. Determined to save what was left of his life, Michael made the choice to leave. Before he left, he tried to convince Robert to run away with him, to leave everything behind and start over somewhere else. But Robert was paralyzed by guilt and confusion. What had happened to Sarah, the woman he had shared so many years of his life with, was a burden he simply couldn't carry while he ran away. In a moment of absolute desperation, Robert finally broke the silence. The confession came abruptly, like a dam breaking. He admitted to the crime, claiming he never intended to kill Sarah. He explained that everything was a tragedy driven by the fear of losing everything he had built over the years. His words were filled with pain and regret, but at the same time, there was a sense of relief in finally telling the truth, as if a terrible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Robert's confession was recorded and later used against him in court. The trial was a shocking spectacle for the community. All the secrets he had tried to hide for so long came to light, exposing the man the city revered as a traitor and murderer. The transformation in public perception was rapid and brutal. Those who once saw him as a pillar of the community now despised him, feeling betrayed by the facade he had maintained for so many years. In court, Robert's fate was definitively decided. He was convicted and taken to prison, where time seemed to drag by as he reflected on the choices that led him to that cell. The double life he had tried to live, the secrets he tried to protect at all costs, all culminated in a tragic ending. The climax of this story ends with Robert finally accepting the harsh reality. His attempt to hide who he really was, to live a life that wasn't true, destroyed him completely. Prison thus became not only a place of punishment, but a bitter reflection on the tortuous paths he chose to follow. With Robert Miller behind bars, the once peaceful and close-knit community faced the devastating consequences of the case. The image of perfection he had built over decades disintegrated, leaving everyone in a state of shock. The man many considered to be an example of morality and success turned out to be someone with dark secrets, and it made people start to question how well they really knew their neighbors. The feeling of distrust spread like a virus, eroding the city's sense of security. Robert and Sarah's children, now motherless and with a condemned father, were taken in by distant relatives. What should have been a new phase in their lives became a period of profound uncertainty. The tragedy that struck the Miller family left deep emotional scars on the children, who now faced a future marked by stigma and pain. Each new day brought unanswered questions, and the absence of their parents, one dead and the other in prison, hung over them like a shadow that seemed impossible to dispel. Meanwhile, Michael, who had fled before his trial, was desperately trying to start his life again somewhere else. However, no matter how much he tried to distance himself, the weight of his guilt followed him relentlessly. He was constantly haunted by the events that triggered the destruction of the Miller family, feeling responsible, even if indirectly, for the collapse of a life that once seemed so stable. Regret gnawed at every attempt to move forward, turning his new life into a constant escape from a past he couldn't escape. The investigation into the Miller case, which began as an isolated incident, ended up revealing other layers of secrets in the town's seemingly perfect families. Each discovery brought to light questions about repression, identity, and the masks people wore to fit into a society that valued appearances above all else. The conversations, once trivial, were now filled with suspicion, and the idea that other houses could hide similar tragedies became increasingly real. The scandal that engulfed Robert was just the tip of a much larger iceberg, which began to destabilize the foundations of the community. In prison, Robert, consumed by guilt and shame, found a different kind of redemption in the pages of a diary. He began writing compulsively, trying to understand the choices that led to his ruin. Each line was an attempt to unravel the reasons that made him live a double life, the lies he told himself and others, and the fear that trapped him in an emotional prison long before he was physically incarcerated. Writing became his only way of seeking redemption, of finding some peace amidst the chaos he created. Robert's story ends with him reflecting on the devastating consequences of his actions. The life of lies and fear he tried to sustain led him to a tragic fate, and now, alone in his cell, he understood that the price of his duplicity was the destruction not only of his own life, but also of all those around him. His journey of self-discovery was painful but necessary, and the only thing he had left was a hope that his words could somehow bring some relief to the souls he had hurt.